Good morning, everyone. Perek Daled Mishna Hey. As we've learned, the Torah tells us the amount of truma to give to a Kohen is any amount, even one grain, one kernel. The sages instituted either 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th. Now, the Mishnah discussion is Hamar b'truma. What if you give more? What if you give more than the designated amount of 1/40th? Rabbi Eliezer says, Echad me'asara k'trumas meiser. You can go up to 1/10 of the grain that you're separating from, just like we find by trumas meiser. I mean, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it works that since we find there is a truma that is 1/10 of something, which is trumas meiser, the tithe that we give to the Levi, he has to give 1/10 of that. So we find there is an amount of 1/10 in relation to truma. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer opinion is that every truma can be at least 1/10 of what you're separating from. Yes, semikan, but if it's more than that, Yaseno trumas meiser l'makom achar, he should make it as trumas meiser for another place. Now, what that means is like this. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you can't do more than 1/10. Can't. The Torah only allows you to do 1/10 when it comes to separating truma. So if you go in and you separate more than 1/10, then what happens is that what you separated as truma is part truma, part not truma. I mean, that extra part is no worse than the rest of the pile. Truma was taken for it, but it still needs the maasros to be taken from it. And the problem is now that what I separated for truma is now part truma, part not truma. I don't know exactly which part is what. So I have to do something now with this extra part in order to make sure that I'm not left with this truma that's a mixture of truma and not truma. The not truma part, you have to separate maasros from it. Otherwise, the Kohen can't eat it. But the problem is, we don't know which part can you actually separate as meiser, because which part of this separation is the truma, which part isn't. And if it comes to you separated the truma as the meiser, it's not going to work. So you need to find some kind of solution to this mixture here of what you separated as truma. The part of it worked for truma, part of it didn't. But you can't exactly separate which part is the part that's not truma. Therefore, the Mishnah says, make a trumas meiser. Now, what that means is like this. What that means is there's actually two ways of explaining this, two ways of how to look at this. What could happen is that the person who separated the truma, and he separated more than he could have, so he has this little amount in the truma that he separated for the Kohen that's not truma. So what he can do now is he can now designate that part, that extra part that's not truma, he can designate it as trumas meiser for something. Meaning, what we're saying right now is that although trumas meiser is supposed to come from the Levi receives his meiser, separates 1/10 of that for the Kohen. If you want to go ahead of time, separate it for the Levi, you could do that. You could go ahead, as long as your grain meisers haven't been taken from it, you could designate your grain to be trumas meiser for, let's say, other grain. So what's happening here is that you've got this separation of truma. It's part truma, part not truma, part tevel for maasros. And you have the power now to actually make that extra amount that's mixed into truma, that you separated as truma, but it couldn't be truma. And now you want to make sure, what are we going to do with this pile? You can separate it as trumas meiser. You can separate it as trumas meiser for meiser grain. According to my understanding, I don't see why it can't work for the grain itself here that you started separating the truma from. But it could work for this pile, maybe for a different pile. But the point is, you're going to convert that extra amount into trumas meiser, and now the whole thing can go to the Kohen. The Kohen can eat the whole thing. Now, what's interesting is that you point out here in the Yad Avram, in the Art Scroll commentary, that depending on how much he went over, will make a difference as to what he can do. Meaning, if let's say the amount, so he went ahead and he took truma more than he was supposed to, more than a tenth. Now, if this more than a tenth turns out to be the equivalent of what Trumas Meiser should be for the rest of this pile, then separating the Trumas Meiser will be very simple. I mean, he knows how much he designated, and therefore, he knows that the extra amount that he designated, he can turn to the Trumas Meiser. It'll be the Trumas Meiser for, or at least part of the Trumas Meiser. It'll be the Trumas Meiser. It'll be the Trumas Meiser for this grain, and therefore everything will be very smooth. He'll just go ahead, separate Trumas Meiser, give it to the Kohen. What the problem is, though, let's say the amount that he designated more than the Truma was more than what the Trumas Meiser of this pile would be. So if it's going to be more, I mean, you can't separate more Trumas Meiser than is meant to be. Trumas Meiser is a tenth of the tenth that goes to the Levi. Can't do more than that. So if it comes out that what he separated for Truma was more than what would be the Trumas Meiser for this grain, so then what he would need to do is he would need this pile, but a different pile of Meiser that Trumas Meiser to be taken from, and the extra amount that he's designated as Truma, which couldn't work, and that's mixed with the rest of the Truma, he can now go ahead and say that extra amount will be Trumas Meiser for this Meiser. And that Meiser doesn't even have to be in front of him. That's the halacha. When you separate Truma for something else, it has to be nearby. If you separate Trumas Meiser for grain, for other grain, for a different pile of grain, from one pile to another pile, it doesn't have to be nearby. And therefore, it becomes an easier way of actually fixing up this Truma. Again, if it could work within the pile itself, it worked out that the amount that you separated extra is the amount of Trumas Meiser for this pile, then you can use it for this pile. If it comes out being more, so again, if you can't use it for this pile because it's still going to be left with a certain amount of grain that could not be turned into Trumas Meiser, so then your other solution is do it for a different place, and it'll be taken care of that way, and you'll make sure that now the whole pile goes to the Kohen and he'll eat it. We no problems. The Rav points out that theoretically we could have even taken this extra amount and not made a Trumas Meiser. We could have made a Truma for a different pile. We could have had other grain that Truma needs to be taken from. He knows how much he designated extra above what he was supposed to, and he'll convert that into Truma for a different pile. That could have been a solution also, but the Rav points out in order to do that, the other grain has to be nearby. And therefore, it would be more convenient to be able to turn it into Trumas Meiser. So that is one approach of what's given here to explain this Mishnah, what it means to make a Truma for a different place. Now, the rest of the Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel says, Mechza chulin and mechza Truma. Excuse me, Rabbi Shmuel disagrees with the Belezer's opinion, and he says he could actually go up to half chulin and half Truma. The maximum amount of Truma you can separate is half. You can land up with having half chulin and half Truma. This is based on how Rabbi Shmuel explains or derives from a pasuk, from a verse in the Torah that deals with Truma, and he derives from that verse that basically Truma can go as far as that what I'm separating, half chulin, half Truma. The B'tar for Rabbi Kiva, I remember Rabbi Kiva say, Achi yeshayir sham chulin. You gotta make sure you have some chulin left. According to them, they also derive this from a verse in the Torah. According to them, you can give as much Truma as you want. The only thing you can't do is designate the whole thing as Truma. But as long as there is something left after you designated Truma, the whole thing is Truma. And that's the halacha, like Rabbi Akiva. The Chachamim told us that a generous person gives 140, but if a person wants to be even more generous than that, they have the power to do so. Okay, Mitzvah Kuf Yadalid, again continuing with the forbidden relatives and having intimacy with them. Mitzvah Slaisas Shalavai al Achiav Mishkav Zachar. Prohibition against being intimate with the brother of one's father, meaning with your uncle, your brother's your father's brother, Mishkav Zachar, in a homosexual act. As it says, the nakedness of the brother of your father you shall not reveal. So lav naisav mishkav zachar. This is similar to what we had before, an additional prohibition to the general prohibition against a homosexual act. If one does do this act with his father's brother, with where witnesses see this and warn them not to do it, they both are punished with stoning. If there was no warning, if it was done intentionally, the people would be liable for severance of life from heaven. If it was done unintentionally, they didn't know it was wrong. They'd be liable to 2 sin offerings. For this prohibition that deals with the father's brother, and for the homosexual act. This applies in all places and at all times. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.